From Beyond Marketing, it's the 20-Minute Call, a podcast about the dreamers, boundary pushers, rebels, and champions of the skydiving industry. Each episode is a narrative journey highlighted by the highs, lows, and luck that the skydiving industry delivers, as told by the most influential people within the sport. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a skydiver, perhaps opening a drop zone, or becoming the next world champion, check out the 20-Minute Call hosted by me, James LeBarry. My guest today burst into global consciousness on October 24th, 2014, when he ascended to an altitude of 135,890 feet, suspended under an enormous gas balloon into the Earth's stratosphere. Once there, he released himself from the balloon, free-falling back to Earth for 123,303 feet before deploying his parachute. His free-fall descent lasted 4 minutes and 27 seconds. During that time, he broke the sound barrier while reaching a top free-fall speed of 822 miles per hour. Alan's jump set the world record for the highest free-fall and total free-fall distance in history. Today, his spacesuit is on display at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. Though the world came to know Alan Eustace in 2014, he had long made a name for himself in Silicon Valley. During his professional career, he worked for Digital, Compaq, and then Hewlett Packard's Western Research Laboratory, where he worked for 15 years on pocket computing, chip multiprocessors, power and energy management, internet performance, and frequency and voltage scaling. In the mid-1990s, he worked with Amitabh Srivastava on ATOM, or ATOM, a binary code instrumentation system that would receive major accolades in the field of programming language, design, and implementation. Now, Alan did all of this before joining a fledgling startup in 2002 known as Google. During his tenure at Google, he served as Google's Senior Vice President of Knowledge, which included the oversight of the engineering and development efforts in maps, search, and research. Today, Alan does not slow down. Alan serves as the technical advisor at Pivotal, which manufactures an easy-to-operate vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. In other words, a flying vehicle that most anyone can operate, just like a car. Alan is also the CEO of Aqua Satellite, a company whose vision is to make ocean data accessible easily and inexpensively to industry science. Lastly, it should be noted that Alan serves on various board seats of companies that range from bringing clean and affordable fusion energy to the planet to a neutral carbon space travel company. In the course of his professional career, Eustace co-authored 9 publications and appeared as co-inventor in 10 patents. In 2019, Alan was inducted into the International Skydiving Museum and Hall of Fame for his extraordinary achievements. And these are just the highlights of his resume. I'm honored to welcome Dr. Alan Eustace to the 20-Minute Call podcast.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Alan, thank you so much for your time. That's quite a resume that I've just read. Do you tire hearing it?
Yeah, it's kind of overwhelming. I mean, there's, when you get old, you've done a lot of things, and you've been associated with a lot of amazing teams. I look back and every one of the things that you mentioned, faces and images, come into my mind of that time, that group of people, how we worked together to solve some really interesting problem. And it's nice, to get a chance to kind of look back on your career. And but I'm really not a look back kind of person, which is why I'm so busy right now, which because it was hard to schedule this podcast. I'm more of a look forward person, and the future is far brighter. I expect that my biggest achievements are yet to come, and I'm working pretty hard on those. So anyway, but it's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. Let's jump right in. Alan, you grew up as the son of an aerospace engineer just outside of Orlando, Florida. As I understand it, you had a love for Apollo space missions. Can you give us a glimpse of your childhood?
Yeah, sure. My dad was an aerospace engineer. He worked for Martin Marietta. Matter of fact, I was born in Baltimore, but But Martin Marietta opened a new facility in Orlando. And so we moved down when I was about 6 months old. And being around my dad was being around a consummate engineer. He loved to build things. He brought home powerful magnets, and, we made matchstick rockets and Estes rockets, and we built model airplanes and stuff. So, and he was infinitely patient, which he needed to be with a small child. I had three younger sisters, and I was definitely not an extraordinary student. I can tell you that right now. But I enjoyed, tinkering and playing with things, and my dad always encouraged that. But it was a very unremarkable childhood. Honestly, it was a lot of fun. We had a pretty close family, but that's how everything started. And the reason Orlando is interesting is my dad obviously worked in the space industry. Martin had a lot of space related contracts, although most of the work that my dad did was defense related. And so he couldn't even tell me about it, so I never really knew what my dad did. Actually, until his funeral, several people walked up to me, and one of them gave me a book, and he had put tabs on things that my dad had worked on, which was kind of interesting. And then occasionally my dad would say, I worked on that project, like the Sprint missile project. He said, I worked on that, but they couldn't say anything more about it. So it's kind of a strange thing, but we lived about 60 miles away from Cape Canaveral at the time, eventually became Kennedy Space Center. And we would watch every launch. I mean, we could watch most of the launches from our front doorstep, but all the important launches, our whole family, 4 kids and parents would get in this 9-passenger white station wagon, and we would drive over the Cape. So every Apollo launch I saw live. And some of the other launches I got to see because, out of creativity. My mom tells a story of one time I was in junior high and there was a launch going on. And I said, could you let out the school so we could all see this launch? And the principal said, no, I cannot let out the school so that you guys can watch a space launch. So creatively, I came up with the idea to ask him. I said, well, don't you have to do a fire alarm test, like twice a year or something like that? And he says, yes. And I said, why don't you do it now? I mean, why don't you do it at 11:59 or whatever? And he thought about it, and he did. We had a fire alarm. We got to go watch launches, but anyway, it was spectacular. I don't know whether you've ever seen a launch, but just watching them is just unbelievable. It's like you see the light off, you see the smoke, you see this thing. The Apollo launches. It seemed like it was so slow getting off the pad, and then it would actually move off the pad, and then the sound from it would rumble, and the ground would shake. And so, but you wouldn't see it until after it got up because you were still, 20 miles away or something like that, or 10 miles away. I still remember every launch. It's like it was like I remember one night launch that the Apollo was so bright you could read a newspaper in front of you. It was a golden age, honestly, of aviation, and I really enjoyed growing up in that moment in time.
Are you fascinated by the launches of today? Because when I watch the SpaceX rockets returning to Earth, it feels like science fiction. I see it, but it's hard for me to process that level of precision. It's seemingly how fast they come in and then decelerate seemingly in the last couple thousand feet and gently touch down. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm totally with you there. It's like I remember hearing a talk by Gwen Shotwell, basically the COO of SpaceX, and she was talking about the very first time they tried to land a booster and how nobody believed it was possible, and the booster came down in this floating pad in the middle of the ocean, and it hit it and crashed and blew up, and the press was like hugely negative on SpaceX over that. And Gwen was saying, we were so elated. We actually hit the pad. That was it was an enormous achievement to hit that pad. And once we knew we could do that, the other stuff, it was just a matter of time until we got it right. But it's a difference. The press was used to things blowing up as always a negative. But where they blew up and why they blew up was actually a huge positive for SpaceX. But I'm with you. I see those 2 boosters coming back, and I don't know whether you've seen it, but there's a view from the booster. You can actually see what the booster sees on the way down. And it's like they are plummeting. I mean, it seems to me like skydiving speeds to the earth, and at the last possible minute, using up the smallest amount of fuel, they stop their descent and land and then shut off. It's magic. It's beautiful.
It's extraordinary. A quick break here to address the Drop Zone owners listening to the pod. If you're a DZO, then you know the insanity of taking your passion and making it your business. Why'd you do that? Running a DZ is hard. Between the stressors of liability, 30-day payment terms on fuel after 4 weeks of miserable weather, and angry staff who are convinced they've been skipped in a rotation, you need a tool that helps reduce your stress. Enter Burble Software.
All right.
Conceived by a DZO who's been in the trenches just like you, Burble is the most sophisticated manifest and booking software on the planet. Your life as a DZO is hard enough, so don't be that DZO who tries to save a few bucks using software that wasn't built for us. Burble, the must-have drop zone management software for the 182DZ to the multi-turbine monster. Burble. By the way, before we get too much deeper, I just want to comment something that I felt comforting because I wanted to be well prepared today, and because of your achievements, I'm very respectful of your time, but a little detail that I came across is that when you were a university student, you used to sell part-time, or you used to work at Disney World part-time selling popcorn and ice cream at Fantasyland. And I just thought, oh, Alan's like the rest of us. He had a pretty normal job at a very unique place.
Well, I started working when I was really young. There was a guy down the street from me, and they held the concession at the minor league baseball and something called the Orlando Sports Stadium. I don't even know whether it still exists. And but they would pick me up, and we would go, and I would sell drinks or popcorn. You had to work your way up to drinks. You started with popcorn and peanuts, and you worked your way up. And I remember, spending an entire night and working really hard. And if it's a freezing night, you're selling drinks, you're not selling anything. But you have to get everything right. But I worked really hard, and I think I got like $5.25 or something like that. And Disney was fun because you go and you interview, and then they put you in whatever job they want. And mine was popcorn and ice cream, and I think I'm 16 years old when I'm there, because I can drive myself out there. I know, but in both of them, they count the number of like ice cream bars in this rolling thing that you roll around, and then you park it and you stay there for the day. But they count the bars, and then they count the money, and those two have to match. And at the end of every night, it was super stressful to see whether you made a mistake in some addition. And of course, the bars themselves were like 65 cents or something like that. It wasn't like $1 for this and $2 for that. So yeah, it was a terrifying job, honestly, at the end of the night. But I actually loved it. I love Disney. They do a great job. It was one of the funnest times I had in my life. Summers were great. All these kids were coming in from all over the world, and I really enjoyed it. And it taught me a lot about interacting with people. I feel like we don't get as many opportunities as children to interact with. I mean, I probably interacted with 100,000 people, in my time there in one capacity or the other, and that's always good for us.
I imagine in a roundabout sort of way. I mean, you've spoken with world press. You've had to be confident. I know that you got a scholarship into college for debate skills, but certainly being able to communicate with others has served you very well as you've communicated not just with world media, but major executives in your line of work.
Well, debate's interesting because the thing that's interesting about debate when I did in both in high school and in early college was you have to be able to argue both sides of an issue, and you have to research both sides of an issue, and you have to have evidence for both sides of an issue. And that training to be able to argue both sides of the issue, I feel like is really important because it teaches you that there are no absolutes. Nothing is black and white. There are smart people on both sides of every issue. And I feel like that training was really important, to me. And I feel like the ability to understand somebody else's perspective and to be able to both discuss, debate, criticize, accept, appreciate. There's a bunch of skills that are related to that I feel like are super important. Were super important to me, and also the ability to think on your feet. You don't have any time. You've got a rebuttal. It's 5 minutes. You've got you're like 12 minutes to prepare for that while you're listening to what everybody else is saying. It's a good skill set, and it has served me well. But that doesn't necessarily set you up for the press, because press is a whole different game. The stakes are high. I mean, if example of this is I have to talk in front of a bunch of investors. It's like a whole room of investors, like 200 investors, and we're a public company at that time, and I have to talk to them and about what we're doing in the future and stuff like that. But if I say something wrong, our stock can plummet. If I say something, like that's too good, our stock could go up. Either of those are bad. I mean, kind of what you want is you to give an entire 12-minute discussion about what the future looks like and have your stock not move at all. That's success. And I've made bad mistakes in the press. I mean, I've said the wrong thing. I remember one time, I won't go into the details, but I said something which was, I basically in an Indian publication said something that maligned one of our biggest advertisers. It was a kind of a subtle thing, but it was a very grueling interviewer, and he caught me in this one thing. And then that became a headline, and that we were now competing with one of our biggest customers. And I remember calling up my boss, Eric Schmidt, and saying, "Hey, I'm sorry, I screwed up." And he said, "Yeah, it happens. And you just let it go. Just let it go." But press is a scary thing. Even today, I'm happy that that part of the job I could definitely do without.
Wow. It's another thing on those stakes at that level. Interesting. Let's talk about skydiving for a moment. You learned to skydive in 1975 with a guy named David Lane. And I'm curious, what was the circumstance that even led you to the drop zone? And who was David Lane to you?
So David Lane was my best friend growing up. He was, from the time I was 6 months old when we moved to the time that he left. He moved in, I think it was the 5th or 6th grade, but we were inseparable. And I still interact with him. We exchanged email messages like 2 days ago. But he was my best friend. He ended up moving to a farm on the other side of town, so I still got to see him, but it was like once a month after that. But he was absolutely totally my best friend, and so he called, and we don't see each other that often, and our paths diverged in extreme ways, and now they're kind of coming back together a little bit. But anyway, he calls me up and he says, "Alan, I want to go skydiving for my 18th birthday." I'm a little older than him, like 6 months older than him. So, and he said, "Would you come with me?" And I said, "Sure." And little did I know what I was getting myself into, because it was the middle of summer. It was like July in, Eustace, Florida, spelled differently, but the same pronunciation. And, in those days, the way training was done, it was a military rig. I had a 28 LL round parachute on the back, giant boots. I mean, literally, they were almost to your knees kind of boots, combat boots, basically, and a green jumpsuit that was made out of canvas, super thick. And then we literally stood in the hot sun, and half the thing was PLFs, parachute landing falls, where we would jump off of a platform that's about 3 feet tall into a pit of sawdust. And we would do that over and over again. And then the emergency procedures were like, we spent ages on emergency procedures, and they were awful. I mean, literally, as a skydiver, like the most common malfunction that you get is a Mae West malfunction in a round, where a line goes over and it creates two bulbs, which is how it's called Mae West. And the literal procedure for that was put your hand over your reserve, which is a belly reserve. So you pull the handle. You have to undo the flaps, grab the parachute in your hands, and throw it down and into the direction of the spin, and hope it comes up on the other side. It's like I mean, you think about that. I mean, as a brand new student, first jump, no help, no radios, no nothing. That's what you're expected to do. So anyway, but it's grueling. And so at the end of it, I made my instructor was Tom Polanco, who I still see, believe it or not, and amazing guy. Anyway, he was my instructor. And so we have to go out and you have to get out on the step of a Cessna and hold on to the strut, and then they, tap your leg and then you jump and then the static line obviously pulls out the parachute. I remember going out on this thing and I get out and the parachute opens and I tell myself, I'm never doing this again, ever in my whole life. And David does the same thing and comes down. And then when we get my little logbook, which I still have that logbook in it, and it said great exit. That's all it said, great exit. And David did a front flip on his or a back flip or whatever. So my jump was better than his. And then he comes down and he says, wasn't that the greatest thing you've ever done? Let's do it again. It's like, really? And I kept doing it. And he ended up going in the Navy and, went to flight school. And then he ended up, they didn't need the pilots, so went into medical school. He became a general practitioner in the Navy, ended up being an administrator. He, at one point, was head of Walter Reed Medical Center, which is where they treat presidents for a short stint, retired. He's on a sailboat with his wife, sailing the world right now and trying to go back to the places he was when stationed. But anyway, just an amazingly different career. But, at that moment, we were the same. we were both trying to learn to skydive at the same time. But it got better after that.
Fascinating. Yeah, I would say, certainly in many, many ways, certainly with the gear. Hard to imagine when, as you're describing that, I visualize sort of this Fandango experience, with that type of gear. And do you ever sort of, as you recall that, go, wow, from a very humble moment or humble beginning in skydiving to what you did in 2014. I mean, I bet you could not have even imagined that would be the future for you.
Yeah, I mean, everything is a progression. It has to do with, people and teams and time and luck and, a bunch of other things that cause you to, take a particular path. And yeah, I would not have imagined it at any given point, that was where I was going to end up. But skydiving is an interesting thing. I feel like skydiving has there's a lot of lessons in skydiving. Nothing's really easy. The stakes are really high. It builds a lot of confidence, that, you can deal with whatever situations, come up and you feel pretty confident. You practice them a lot. And, I still practice, every time. I mean, I don't know whether everybody else does this. I don't really do it, but pretty much every time I make a jump, which isn't that frequently really, but on the way up, I'm practicing the skydive, the exit, whatever skydive I'm doing, because I can really only do belly and only slightly good at that. But, and then I, practice. I mean, I imagine the break off, I imagine the track, I imagine the opening. And then I just keep going through the emergency procedures. Here's the malfunction that I have. Here's what I'm going to do. And, I do it every time, even though I've only had like 2 malfunctions. But that process of imagining all the things it was exactly the same on the record jump. It was exactly the same, except I had the flight up took longer. It was, these twin otters can, get you up in 12 minutes or something like that. And this was like 2 hours and 7 minutes or something to get up there. But the process was, roughly the same.
Do you recall the moment when jumping from the stratosphere first entered your mind? What inspired that?
Yeah, no, it's, I know pretty much exactly when it happened. I spent my whole skydiving career, thinking about Joe Kittinger and, the amazing jump in 1960. I'm not sure whether everybody does that, but I certainly did that. I'm sure there's a lot of other skydivers out there that think about, because it's natural, right? You say, you start in my day, the jumps were mostly at 5,500 feet when I started and with a 20-second delay. And then, they moved up to 10,000 feet, as aircraft got better. And now they're 14.5 or something like that with turbine aircraft and things. But, I don't know. Maybe I'm strange. Maybe you can tell me. But I don't know. Didn't you always wonder, like, what if I could go to 20? What if I could go to 25, 30? And then you have to ask yourself, well, what's the highest anybody's ever been? And what would it be like? So And I read a lot. I mean, I still love reading, although I buy books faster than I read them, which is causing my night table to get like out of control. But yeah, I read everything on that I could find on high altitude skydives, and it's always ruminating in the back of my mind. So when I saw the Red Bull attempt and what they were doing, I had always had this idea that well, let me back up. The way that it happened was, I'm not sure how I can make this short or even close to short, but there was a friend of mine that wanted to know whether you could jump out of a Gulfstream 550 business jet, and it's like, can you do that? And I thought that was an interesting question, for me. And I being an engineer and a skydiver and a pilot, it's like, I'm kind of a good person to be able to analyze that. And everybody said it was impossible, which is a trigger word for me. I mean, if you say you can say it's hard, you can say it's expensive, but when somebody uses the word impossible, that just like, it's like a knee-jerk reaction. It's like a doctor hitting your knee, and all of a sudden your foot goes forward. But they said it was impossible, and I started looking into it, and I said, I just can't see any reason why it's impossible. And the door comes in and up on that aircraft. The speeds are, 1.3 times the ref speed. Doesn't seem bad. 120 to 140 miles an hour, or knots in this case. It can obviously climb. It's like you can depressurize an aircraft. I mean, the tail's high. The front of the engine is lined with the door. I'm not going to be sucked in. And it's like, I don't know. I cannot see why you can't do this. And it's a long story on how we did. But 5 years later, with a lot of paperwork, FAA, all this kind of stuff, I got a supplemental type certificate for jumping out of it. But when we were just about to get to the point where it was, where we were actually going to get to jump out of a Gulfstream, I said, there's no way I'm going to go to all this trouble and not jump out of it myself. The guy Scott Smith was running the program. He's out of Paris Valley. You may know him. And a great guy. So I said, look, if we're going to do this, and I had sold my rig, I had jumped in 10 years. I mean, nothing was there. I said, I'm going to relearn how to skydive so that I can jump out of a Gulfstream. So I went down to Paris Valley, and there was a guy, Luigi Conti, who I'm sure you probably know, amazing guy. So he did my recurrency, basically. He told me what rig to buy. He told me, what the size of the parachute could be. We did a bunch of landings. We did all the free fall. All that stuff came back pretty quickly. The only thing that didn't come back quickly is these, very high performance parachutes. I mean, they're like way faster on the ground. You have to be way more careful on them compared to the parachutes of the old days. But anyway, I got good enough so that I could do that. So it's fine. So I got to jump out of the Gulfstream. We got the supplemental type certificate. All's good. But later, Luigi calls me and says, I want to do this high altitude skydive, and would you come with me to Mojave spaceport, where Dick Rutan actually had built a capsule that he was going to use for a around the world balloon flight. He said, can you look at this and tell me whether you think this might be the core asset to be able to break, Joe Kittinger's record? So I flew down there, met him there, and I looked at this giant thing, and it seemed like the worst possible way to go up. It had this tiny little way to get out of it, and this big composite thing weighed like a huge amount of weight. And so after that, I told Luigi, I said, if it was me, I would just go up in a spacesuit. I would ignore all this. I said, you need a spacesuit anyway? Why not just use that? I'd strap a couple oxygen tanks to the front of a tandem rig, and that's how I would do it. So anyway, Luigi's funding fell through for it, and he decided not to buy this capsule, which was a smart idea. But about, 4 or 5 months later, after the funding had gone through, it was a dead end, I call Luigi back up and I say, hey, Luigi, would you mind if I pursued this idea that, I had suggested to you about, because I thought at the time, well, tandem rig takes 450 pounds, right? More if you want to. We tested it higher than that. I said, I don't know how much a spacesuit weighs, but, turns out spacesuit weighs about 65 pounds. And then I said, just strap on the two links instead of a passenger, a big oxygen system, and you're golden. We can go. And it was, by the way, not anywhere near that simple, but but that's how I started. And then when I saw Red Bull was doing it in the giant capsule thing that weighed a ton, I said, boy, Just seems like the wrong idea. So I just studied it for a long time as an engineer, saying, well, would this work? Would this work? Would this work? Would this work? How much oxygen would I need? What other systems would I need? Who built space? So I just kind of studied it on my own. And then at the end, there's a moment where you say, I think it will work, but I wanted to test it among somebody who actually knew about these things, because I don't. I'm a total amateur in every aspect, from balloons to spacesuits to environmental systems to heating systems. I don't know anything about any of that other than what I read. And so I gave a call to Peter Diamandis, who I actually just saw like 3 days ago, coincidentally. I said, here's what I want to do. Is there somebody on Earth that I could run this by to find out if I'm totally crazy or not? He said, yeah, I know just a guy, Tabor McCallum. His company, Paragon, builds high-altitude environmental systems and toxic environment suits with, oxygen and things. He'd be like the perfect person. So Peter did an introduction by email. I called Tabor up, and we spent an hour. It's the funnest conversation about what I want to do. And Tabor says, not only do I think it's possible, but I would love to do it with you. So now I was like, now I'm caught, right? I wanted him to just say, yes, this idea would work. But now he says, no, we can do it. I think a smarter person would have just put it on the shelf and declared victory. But no, he had the right people. He had the right team. We worked together to get the pieces of the puzzle that we didn't have. I had to call, United Parachute Technologies and talk to Mark about getting a tandem rig. And, that was tough. It's like, well, how many skydives you have? When was your last skydive? Are you a tandem instructor or anything? It's like, but anyway, Mark was great. He was super helpful. And he gave the biggest gift to the project that he could ever give, which is Blickies, Daniel Blignot, who's like, he's wonderful, engineering, skydiver, everything. And so that was really, we found somebody who knew about balloons and connected with the balloon manufacturer. So before we know it, we were in business. But there were some bad things along the way.
If you're a fan of the 20-Minute Call, I'd like to invite you to be a member of a budding community with me on Patreon. By becoming a patron of the show, you can join me behind the scenes to discuss options for future guests and gain access to some show swag. It's pretty sweet. Details on how to become a patron can be found in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. I have to ask, you're an engineer, you're a mechanical engineer. You sketched all this, you ran it by Tabor McCallum, and you see the process. But then you got to talk to your wife about this. What was her initial reaction to this idea?
Well, first, it's worse. I'm not even a mechanical engineer, although I did start out as a mechanical engineer and quickly switched to computer science. So my wife, good ideas for me are not necessarily good ideas for her, and I think there's a story behind everybody that tries to do something like this on the family. For her, there's no upside. There's only downside. She doesn't care about a skydiving record, or she doesn't care. And I don't really care that much about records, but I do care about the idea that we could push the frontiers, in a very interesting way and build something which nobody's ever built and nobody thought was possible. And also the history of the highest altitude skydiving is not very good. Going back to the beginning, there have been quite a few accidents and incidents along the way. If you just look at historically what the chances are, they're not that good. So she wasn't that thrilled, but she made a mistake of instead of saying no right at the beginning, which is what she should have done. She didn't think it was possible, so she kind of let me get farther and farther down before she put her foot down, and by that time it was kind of too late, and she kind of knew it was too late. So, but it was really, really hard on her and her family. But in the end, she made me do a bunch of things which were kind of funny in hindsight. But she said, "Look, if anything happens to you, I'm not going to clean up the mess. Okay, don't make me clean up the mess. So here's a bunch of things that I want you to do before that." So that I don't have to clean up the mess. And so, and there was a list of like 10 or 11 of them. But to give you an example, I'm not going to tell you the whole list, but to give you an example, you have to write your own obituary. She's not going to write it. You have to write it. So I did. I wrote my own obituary. I actually saw it. It's on my it's on my computer right now. And then but there was other stuff. I want you to I want you to do a video for each of my two kids at the time saying why this was so important to you, should anything go wrong. And so I did that. She said I had to get in better shape. So I had to get a personal trainer and had to work out so that this kind of mind and body was, skydiving isn't the most exercise driven thing, right? You're falling, right? How hard can it be? But anyway, so I did that. I had to find somebody who would plan my funeral if I was gone. So I got my best friend and I wrote him a check. A pretty big check. And I said, this is all the cost of my funeral. Please don't cash this check unless I die, and so I handed it to him and I figured out where I wanted my ashes buried and all this kind of stuff. It was a process. And, I thought the chances of dying were really low, like super low, like almost zero. But the chances were like reasonably high based on history. And so it was hard. It was hard on her. I have a lot of respect for her, allowing me to go through it, even though I know the trauma that was causing for her and my kids, honestly, at the same time. Thankfully, it came out okay.
Did she watch it on the day that you made the jump? No,
we had a long conversation about whether she should be there or not, and whether the kids should be there or not. And it's not that there's much to see because the balloon launch happens, 7 a.m. roughly. And it's 2 hours and 7 minutes to go up. But by the time you jump, you're 70 miles away. You can't see anything, right? You've got helicopters and medics and spacesuit technicians and stuff. They're all, going down, following you. Actually, Blicky's followed in a Kodiak. So as soon as I opened, he actually jumped out and opened with me. And he was my wingman on the way down. He actually landed before me. He told me which I landed in the same direction he did, and both of us agree it was downwind. But we actually had smoke that was supposed to tell us which way, but the smoke was hugging the ground, and I think at 15 feet up it was going the other direction. But yeah, and he could tell me about power lines. It's kind of hard to see really well in these space books, and can't flare them. So, and I weigh 405 pounds with all the rig and stuff. So anyway, it wasn't really a landing. It was more of a crash, which I'm sure everybody gets a big kick out of. But it was a fun experience.
I imagine when you're having to face the realities of your demise, if this doesn't go well, that it really gives you pause. And clearly you obviously thought that, yeah, this is near zero, that I will perish after going through all those very serious steps and still going through with it. So that being said, I'm big on empathy, and I'm trying to imagine being you on the morning of October 24th, the morning of the jump. Did you get any sleep? Are you riddled with worry after all the exercise you've been through with your obituary and all those other things?
No, not at all. For me, it was just I'm an engineer. It was a checklist, right? I just had to go through each of these steps, I didn't agonize over them or anything like that. I don't have I'm not super spiritual or anything like that, so for me, it's like, you die, it's like, it's more of a statistic for me. It's like at 58 years old, you can look in the actuarial table and you can see what your chances of dying. It's like, and it's not zero at 58 years old. My dad died at 58 years old, honestly. So the question is, for this jump, we had done, 1,000 tests, right? I jumped 5 times out of airplanes in the exact same system. I'd been in that spacesuit for, 50 hours or something like that. And that spacesuit had been tested, extensively for a long period of time before that. And we had done those 5 tests. We had done 3 balloon tests, one at 55,000, one at 105,000, 110,000. And then the last one was 135,000. And each of them was a stepping stone along the way where 1 or 2 things would change. Like at 55,000, you can almost open any time. There's almost no dead time. You just don't accelerate fast enough that you can't open your parachute. There's probably about a 10-second window that you don't want to open your parachute because you're going too fast. That was the scariest of all things because it was the largest amount of new equipment. The whole balloon that we added. Planes are planes, right? They mostly work. But this was a new system. So I think that was probably the place that I was most nervous, was on the 55,000. Once at the 105,000, everything worked exactly as we expected it to. There was no difference. And then the final jump, the only thing that was added was speed. Everything else was the same. And so the question is body movements and control at Mach 1.2. Nobody knew, right? I mean, Felix is the only person who knows what it was like, because he actually went even faster than that. But he didn't have a drogue parachute. He didn't have the system I did to stop spins. So I think he was probably more nervous than I was. But I think my heart rate was fine. I don't think there wasn't much anxiety at all. It's that warm feeling where you feel like, you've tested everything. You've got the best team on earth behind you. You got the best equipment on earth behind you. The feeling is more like, I don't want to let the team down by doing something stupid. That's in the back of your mind, that's more what I was worried about. I was very confident that we had addressed, every risk to the maximum extent possible, and that everything would work. So it was a happy moment. I mean, it was relaxed. I tried not to use very much oxygen. So I tried to stay right on the edge of sleep the entire way up and just, enjoyed the views.
Remarkable. What did your employers, colleagues at Google think of this? Because this was a 3-year process through all the testing to actually making the jump. Must have thought you were nuts.
I forgot to answer one question you said about my wife and whether she was there or not. So we decided that to keep everything as normal as possible for the kids. So the kids went to school that day, just like any other day. And she stayed with them so that she could be with them if anything was to happen. And so we had a text messaging group chat for anybody that wasn't there. And she was on that group chat. And so anyway, that's how she found out. But anyway, so back to colleagues at Google.
It's also very interesting. I've often thought about Luke Aikens and his jump without a parachute, and also going, gosh, does your wife come? Do your kids come to observe? It's a big decision. It's a lot to think about. If it's wonderful if it goes right, terrible if it goes wrong, obviously.
Yeah, and I think we made the right decision. I don't think having the kids there would have been. I don't think it would have been good for them. I think it would have made them more stressed out. For the same reason that Kathy isn't happy about this whole thing in some ways, there's no upside for the kids either. I mean, honestly, they would never, ever tell any of their friends that their dad holds a world record in skydiving. It would be like, that'd be the last. I mean, first, you don't tell about your kids anyway. I mean, your parents anyway, but they would rather their lives would be infinitely easier for them if there's not it's kind of like this deep, dark family secret, in some ways that they hide from the world. Hopefully there's not that many people on the podcast that overlap with my 2 kids, or 3 kids now, but it's different for them than it is for me.
Yeah, certainly. So what did your Google colleagues think of this as through this 3-year journey of prep to the big jump?
Well, they didn't like the idea either. Not because I was taking time off of work, because I did take some time off of work, but they were just worried too. I mean, everybody was worried. They all. I mean, Google's a very optimistic culture, and it was a very technical culture, and people thought it was cool on one side, but they thought it was dangerous on the other. And I mean, how do you explain skydiving to non-skydivers, right? It's like most of them think it's like a daredevil activity kind of thing where you get these immense cocaine-like rushes. That's what they think about this thing is. And that's not what skydiving is, at least to me. I mean, I'm sure there are other people with different views on what skydiving brings to them, but skydiving is the exact opposite. It's spending a lot of time understanding what the risk is, a lot of time preparing for the risk, understanding them, having systems and backup systems that will take care of it, understanding your own risk profile, how you feel that day, other kinds of things, having people around you that could potentially help, being trained for long periods of time to develop a level of confidence that, you're not going to die. I mean, it's the last thing on your mind, when you leave an airplane. I mean, you're flying. I mean, it's a different kind of flight. It's a different kind of freedom. And the cost of that freedom is, has some serious consequences if you don't do things right. But if you do things right, it's a very, very safe thing to do. So that's why it's hard to explain to people at Google that no, this thing is not dangerous. It's the exact opposite of a daredevil. A daredevil has all these risks and they throw them all aside and they just, even though there's a high rate of death, there's a very good chance, something bad's going to happen, but they do it anyway. Evil Knievel, that's like the definition. I don't think new people even know who Evil Knievel is, but in my day, motorcycles, jumps, going over this thing, crashing all the time, every bone in his body had been broken. That's a daredevil. For me, it was the exact opposite. But it's hard to explain, those. And my kids would always say, when I try to explain something to them, they say, there you go with the science thing again, there you go with the odds, there you go with the statistics, and their eyes glaze over. They don't want to hear any of that. But for me, that was what it's like. So anyway, so at Google, they were really supportive. I mean, I had a ton of vacation time because I don't think I'd taken hardly any vacation in a long, long time. I had a pretty big job, but I had a great team. I mean, an unbelievable team. They could do everything. People talk about succession planning. You should name one person under you who could take over you if you get hit by a bus. And it's like, I had 10 people working for me, and 6 of them could have taken over my job and done a better job than I can. So I wasn't worried about that. The company wasn't worried about that. But I did. In the first one, I thought we were going to get done in like a year. And, it ended up taking 2 years. And I took a leave of absence so that I could be in Roswell like the whole time, during this period. It was like supposed to be a 3-month leave of absence. We were just starting the airplane jumps then, and they always got delayed. So I just sat around and did nothing, waiting for this test. And we finally did the airplane jump. It went horribly. I mean, I can go into the details, but a lot of things went wrong. Nothing that made me fear for my life, but we just missed on a bunch of different areas for a bunch of different reasons. So we had to do a reset of the project, and we ended up taking a year redesigning everything. And I came back, and I remember going to my boss and I'm saying, we're about to go through this same process again. I said I could go on another leave of absence, but honestly, I was just waiting all the time, for a test to happen, and it wasn't very efficient. And he said, well, what do you want? My boss was Larry Page at the time. And he said, well, what would be best for you? And I said, I don't know whether you can do this, but the best thing for me is if I can just leave anytime I want. They tell me a test is going to happen, and I wait until they're absolutely sure at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, and they give me a call and say yes, and I can get on I'm a pilot and I have a plane, so I can get on the plane and I can fly to there, and I can be there for that test in the next morning. And, that test will take some amount of time, and then I'll come back. So what I really want more than anything else is to be able to leave on zero notice and have somebody designated to take my place, or part of my team take my place during that period of time. And I said, that's when I can spend the most time with the company, but that's the flexibility I need. And Larry said yes. And so that's what happened. And it was great for everybody. Honestly, it was good because I got to train a bunch of different people. They got to go to the same meetings I got to go to, all the executive meetings. I think it was good for them. It was good for Larry. He got to see some new faces and things like that. It was good for me and the team because we didn't have to plan ahead. We could just do it anytime we wanted to. And it's like extremely efficient. So anyway, thank my boss for that.
Yeah, I'm going to sidestep just for a quick moment. You joined Google in 2002 when it was just, fledgling. I think Google only even became into my awareness in 2003. Did you have any inkling when you joined the company in 2002 that it would become the Google that we know it is today?
No, none. I joined in 2002. The company started in 1998 with Larry and Sergey. So it was 4 years old. We probably had 200 people, 250 people. I don't know what size. So it wasn't a tiny company at that point. But we had just introduced AdWords, which was basically the way we were going to make money. Before that, the only way that we had made money is a deal with Yahoo. So we had just introduced what would be the most important thing in the history of the company. I had no idea. I mean, I don't pick jobs because of the money or anything like that. I pick jobs because of the people that I work with and whether I feel like I can learn, and a lot of the people that worked at Google I'd worked with before. And loved working with them. They're still some of the smartest, most interesting, most dedicated, creative people I've ever met. And And so they twisted my arm. I mean, it was funny. The reason I ended up at Google was I'd already turned them down like 8 times. HP was about to buy Compaq. I mean, I worked at Digital Equipment Corporation, bought by Compaq. Compaq was about to be bought by HP. And there was a massive layoff that was going to happen after that. It had been in the news. And my group was definitely going to be affected. There's no doubt about it. And so my friend Luis Barroso gave me a call and he said, Alan, I'm no longer going to take no for an answer. And so he was super persistent. And then 15 minutes later, I get a call from Walma, Larry's assistant, saying Larry wants to have breakfast with me. He was a big deal even back then. I mean, he's an amazing person. I had breakfast with Larry, and I heard his whole vision of where he wanted to take the company and how we wanted to make all information accessible to anybody around the globe at any time. And I just bought in on it. So, but I had to wait. I had to wait like 4 months because if I was going to have to lay off people, I wanted to do it myself. So I stayed for 4 more months or something like that until we were done with that layoff, and then I went and joined Google, and it was amazing. I mean, just that number of people, that number of challenges, it was a dream. I mean, a dream come true, honestly.
I own a digital marketing agency. We are executing Google Ads for many, many clients, certainly many in the skydiving industry, many beyond that in a lot of different spaces. So thank you for Google Ads.
Well, it's fun too because it's like, well, let me just add one thing on the ads. It's kind of funny that before that I worked at Digital, and Digital, was the home of Alta Vista, which was a competing search engine at the time. It was turning into a portal, and this idea, and no one knew how to make money on a search engine. And then there was the interesting thing about Google is somebody made a connection. I don't know who the first person, probably Solar actually, made the connection. If somebody's searching for something, there's a chance they might actually want to buy it. And if you put an ad there, it was actually information that was very actionable for them to do to be able to take it. And that ad, you could do an auction for that ad and figure out what the price is for that. And that insight, that one tiny insight, that if people search for something, they might want to buy it, was the key to, now, it's a $1 trillion company or something like that. But it was a small insight that led to that.
That is still, 20 odd years later. I mean, whenever I have a client say, look, I need to do something that's going to give me strong ROI quickly. Oh, it's Google Ads. We usually start right there. So that's extraordinary story. Coming back to the jump, one thing that struck me was the drogue system. You knew you needed to use a drogue for stability, but there would be a challenge at zero gravity that it would be very possible that the drogue would wrap around you. So to prevent that, another option considered would be, well, maybe we just deploy once you get going, but at such high speeds, the whole drogue could just blow up. And I was really fascinated. I understand that you worked with UPT, and I wanted to talk about this because I think a lot of our audience knows the folks at UPT, to create sort of a pipe system on the drogue that would prevent it from wrapping. But I was trying to think, who came up with that? How did that get figured out? No real precedents from it that I'm aware of.
We didn't know whether we were going to have a drogue or not. We didn't actually decide to have a drogue for certain. I mean, we did early wind tunnel tests without a drogue. So, the system was flyable without a drogue. But we actually saw the Red Bull attempt. We saw Felix in an inverted flat spin. And at that moment, we say, I think we should use a drogue. So, for us, it was, Felix made that decision for us, in some ways. And so we did the first thing that you would think of is, we have a tandem rig, right? So we did a normal tandem drogue, and we attached at the normal tandem attach point. And then we put a dummy up to 120,000 feet and dropped it. And it spun like a top, like 180 revolutions per minute. I mean, instantly fatal. And it's like, well, the drogue and we thought the drogue was going to solve all our problems, but it kept you face to earth. That was the good news, but it didn't stop you from spinning. And then the funny part was we started looking historically at all the different systems, and nobody else had spun like a top. Kinder had essentially a drogue, and he didn't spin. And so the question, but he didn't go up as high. And so we ended up actually going to Luke Aikens. It's funny how, because we knew that they had an emergency system because they had done they had done a retrospective, an open retrospective that we went to. It was open. It was in LA, and we knew that they had used a drug, had an emergency drug that they never fired. It would have fired even without Felix if they had gone, if the spin had been fast enough. But we went to Luke and we said, hey, how did you do this? I mean, what was that system? And he goes, you'll never believe this, but if you change the attachment point of the drogue from the butt up to the neck, you won't spin. And it was like, no way. So he showed us some video and he didn't spin. So the first thing Blickies and I did when we went back to is Blickies took his wife's rig and actually set it up with a pilot chute, a hand deployed pilot chute that attaches at your neck and has a release on the neck, and then it basically releases the main. And it was the strangest looking rig you've ever seen. I definitely didn't ask for a pin check from anybody else there, and we tried it out. And sure enough, you don't spin. I mean, it's amazing. And in our system, it causes some bobble. But anyway, so we knew the drogue was going to be effective, and we knew it could keep us from spinning. We did another test. We went from 180 RPM. The dummy spun at 9 RPM or 10 RPM or something, and a high attachment point, which is even better. So we knew that. We had to figure out how to get it to deploy. And Joe Kittinger had a timer associated with him, but when he tried to get out, not on the record jump, but on a previous jump, he triggered the timer early, trying to get out of his seat. The timer went off too early. It wasn't enough speed. The drogue wrapped around his neck. He went unconscious. He had an early AAD at the time, which saved his life. So we knew it was a problem. But the problem is you have a very small window that you can deploy that. When you're going too slow, it'll wrap around your neck. If you're going too fast, it'll just blow up. And then our requirement says we have to get an unconscious jumper down. So as you go higher and higher, you have to change the time associated with a timer. And if I'm unconscious, how does that happen? In the end, we were sitting around a hotel room and we're talking about how do we get that drogue out early. And the original idea, one of the ideas, we had a lot of different ideas, but one is to just put it on the end of a long pipe. Just create a long pipe and put the drogue on the end of it. It can't wrap up with you. There's just no way. I mean, you're just physically separated from it. And then Blickies had remembered this thing about a system that he had done where you can take a flat piece of carbon fiber with a particular temperament, and it will its natural shape is a tube, but you can pull it out to be flat, and then you can wrap it on a coil. And so as it pulls off, it forms a pipe. And it was like, wow. And then you put the drogue parachute in the middle of it. And then as you're falling away, this pipe forms. And then at the end, you get the drogue bridle. And then the drogue comes out after that. And it's like brilliant. I mean, it's just totally brilliant. It solved all the problems. I don't know. It's just great engineering, great insight. And I think that's what's great about, the team is, just the ability to come up with these really insights that solve, what, for years I thought was an impossibly difficult problem. And the solution was simple, elegant, repeatable, worked every time. And it's funny, if you look at the videos of my jump, all the previous, the 55 and the 105, I basically just fell flat and stable away. But on the record jump, maybe there's just a slight asymmetry, but I actually did a backflip. And I remember looking up at two things. One is the drogue bridle and the drogue up in front because it's orange, right? And also the giant balloons. First time I'd seen the balloon as I fell away from it. So it was a wonderful exit. I mean, I highly recommend it. And we should have done it on purpose. The reason I wasn't concerned is because it was safe by design.
Amazing. You were in free fall for 4.5 minutes. What are you consciously thinking about in that very long free fall time?
Well, the thing about the drogue is that there was a side effect of the drogue having that high, and it's that you bobble up and down. And it's pretty slow. It's like 1 hertz or something like that. So once a second, once every 2 seconds or something, your head goes up and down, stuff like that. So it would have been disconcerting if you didn't know what was going to happen, but it happened all the time. It happened on the airplane jumps too, and we knew about it. But it wasn't worth fixing. It didn't really cause a problem. So there's a little bit of a disorientation that comes from that. But the interesting thing about the free fall is it's weightless because you're falling and there's no resistance to you. So you can't hear anything. I mean, it is as if you are not, they are so far away that you can't even see. There's no ground rush at 110,000 feet, right? And so it's a kind of a surreal experience there, except in probably about 14, 15 seconds, it makes sure that I'm stable and flipped over and I start the bobble. I was kind of obsessed about holding heading. I mean, like, that's what I was spending all my time doing, is seeing, because it was really fun at Mach 1, because the smallest move causes you to start turning. And then you have to stop the turn. The turn will keep going. So it's not like you hold out your arm and then you wait until you stop and then pull it back in. If you do that, you're going to go the other direction really fast. So it was this toying with flying the spacesuit and seeing how close I could maintain heading, which I did a really pretty good job. But I was kind of so obsessed with maintaining my heading that I probably, there's some other things I probably should have done during the time. Like, I'll give you an example. So I'm watching the altimeter, by the way, all the time. I mean, just, you check altimeter. But of course, the altimeter doesn't move because it's exponential. It's like the bottom part is like a normal altimeter, but the top part is like 150,000, 140,000. And so, it takes you forever to move from one to the other. So I'm waiting for my altimeter to really show some movement. Then it goes fast when it gets down. And so the idea was to pull at 10,000 feet. And so 12,000 feet comes around. I'm still holding heading. I'm having a great time. And so the process, though, to find the ripcord is hard because you can't see anything. So you have to reach down symmetrically. You have to reach down and you have to, go over one handle and then you go to the second handle. The bottom, it's like a tandem rig. The bottom handles are the main. Right and left will do the same thing. And then the one on the right top is a cutaway handle. And one on the left top is a reserve handle. So you have to go over the cutaway handle and to the main handle. And then I go back up to the cutaway handle to make sure I got the right one. And then I go back to the other one. But as I was going back to the main one, my hand falls off. Okay. So I was like, shoot. So anyway, so then I start over. I have to go back to and this had happened on one of the training jumps too. It wasn't an unusual thing. A little bit of wind, and these suits are hard to do. So anyway, I did it again. Got to it, pulled, everything was fine. But I opened probably 1,500 feet lower than I want to. And I'm thinking to myself, when the parachute opens, I'm thinking to myself, it's like, Alan, you had 120,000 feet to find that handle. Why on earth did you wait until 12,000 feet? And it would have been super embarrassing had the AAD was going to go off at like 7,000 feet or something like that. So it would have been super embarrassing to have that AAD go off. So anyway, I'm glad I opened when I did. But anyway, just a funny side thing about 120,000 feet to find a main ripcord, and I didn't do it until 12.
Amazing. And it's so incredible to hear you say, I was just having the greatest time. This podcast is sponsored by Beyond Marketing, the digital marketing agency for the skydiving industry. Now, I'm not a fan of lots of ads during a podcast. I mean, who likes ads? So I'll stop talking about how marvelously wonderful Beyond Marketing is. But if you're curious about what the amazing people of Beyond Marketing do to help drop zones and manufacturers thrive, then you should check out their website at dropzone.marketing. That's dropzone.marketing. Alan, it's now been 10 years since the jump, and you've moved forward on to very incredible things. You are now the CEO of a company called Aqua Satellite. Can you share what that is, what you're up to? Because and by the way, I've noticed that there's this symmetry between your aviation and also undersea. Like, for example, your whole spacesuit, I think the concept was, hey, it's almost like being underwater, self-contained, like a scuba diver. Why not replicate that concept up in the air? And then I'm reading about Aqua Satellite, and I don't know, there just seems to be some symmetry with water and air with you. But please share about Aqua Satellite.
Well, it's funny because I learned to scuba dive and I learned to skydive almost exactly the same time. I got my scuba diving certification. But I love skydiving and I hated scuba diving. And not hated it, but it was like I didn't like the gear. I didn't like the claustrophobia under the water. I didn't like having to, like constantly repressurize, my Eustace system. I mean, it was like I just never felt like comfortable underneath the water. Part of it was we were growing up in Florida, so we would do cave diving and stupid things because we were young. But I always liked skydiving way more than I liked scuba diving. But when I left Google, I thought, what are some of the important problems? I mean, what are things that we as humans need to solve in some way? And there's a bunch of them, but one of them was energy, which is why I'm on the board of Commonwealth Fusion System, trying to build fusion reactors, which is going really well, by the way. I think fusion is a glimmer of hope for people who are worried about the fact that our planet's going to burn up. Fusion, I think, holds a lot of promise as a way to manufacture energy rather than having to dig it up and burn it and ruin our atmosphere. But another was the oceans. I mean, there's kind of an explorer side of me, and it's like, I also did climbing and mountaineering, not high altitude things, but it's like we don't know anything about the oceans. It's like we should fix that. I mean, there's a saying, we know more about the surface of Mars than we do about our own oceans, and it's true. And I had helped with an expedition to try to find Amelia Earhart back in 2017. My friend Dave Jordan, who worked on me with Stratix, we didn't find Amelia Earhart, but what I did understand is, it is incredibly expensive to put any sensor anywhere in the ocean anytime. I mean, the ships alone are $50,000 to $200,000 a day. It's like, how are you going to ever learn anything about the ocean if the cost of entry is that? So anyway, I started a small company. It's almost exactly 4 years ago. It's tiny. We have 10 or 11 people working at it, but we're trying to build an autonomous, not a manned system that can explore the oceans. And it's going really well. I mean, we're making good progress to build something which is cheap and can spend a lot of time in the ocean, can take pictures of all these different places, and can teach us about the ocean. So for me, that's important. And then I still have a love of, the sky. I have, airplanes, the electric vertical takeoff landing. I still love the idea that, anybody could do kind of what I did, except in a nice, safe environment. So, Tabor and Jane started a company called Space Perspectives. It's trying to make it so, ordinary people can see kind of the same thing I saw. So anyway, it's just fun. There's another friends and family, urban sky, Jared Leidick worked with me on the environmental system. He and Andrew started a company called Urban Sky that's doing sensing with balloons. So yeah, I'm kind of continuing to live the dream. It's not over. It's not even close to over.
It's remarkable and completely inspiring. Alan, thank you for your time. I am so grateful for it. I know you're extremely busy, and it was very generous of you to speak with me today. I'm very grateful and honored for the time.
Well, I'm very grateful and honored in the skydiving community that has supported me in innumerable ways. It's a joy, honestly, to hang around skydiving. I wish I had more time to skydive more, but I love being around skydivers, and I love that you're doing a podcast to basically spread the joy of skydiving community. And also spreading it outside the skydiving community. So thank you for what you do. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the hard work on the questions. You obviously spent a lot of time preparing, which is really nice. So, some of those stories I hadn't heard for a long time. So thank you for spending that time, and I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you. Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening to the 20-Minute Call podcast. Please do follow us on your podcast app, so you always have the latest episode, which is released every Monday. If you want to contact the team, our email address is podcast@beyondmarketing.xyz. This episode was edited and engineered by Garnet Znydrick of the YouTube channel Blue Skies Fun Days. Thanks for listening, and join us next week for our next episode.